Welcome back to Leadership for a Changing World. I'm Johanna Von Delling, and I'm president and publisher of Barracola Publishers, and I'm the co-host and co-producer of the event. For our next session, we're going to be talking with Drs. Ken and Margie Blanchard. Dr. Ken Blanchard is an author, speaker, business consultant, and co-founder and chief spiritual officer of the Ken Blanchard Companies, an international management training and consulting firm that he and his wife Margie began in 1979. Dr. Margie Blanchard is a motivational speaker, management consultant and trainer, author, and entrepreneur. As co-founder of the Ken Blanchard Companies, Margie developed the company into one of the premier management consulting and training companies in the world. Welcome, Ken and Margie.
Good to be with you.
Good to be here.
At the end of the talk, we'll let you know how you can access some important free resources from Ken and Margie, so please make sure you stick around until the end of the call. Before we get into your topic today, Ken and Margie, we're asking everyone to share their perspective on the question, what do leaders need to do today to adapt to a changing world? Ken, what do you think?
Well, Joanne, I think they really have to realize that leadership is not about them, it's about the people that they're serving. And so then they need to get out of their own way. And if you take care of your people, they'll take care of you and they'll take care of the organization. So it's we, not me. That's my big advice.
We, not me. That's great. Thank you for being so pithy and so profound at the same time. Okay, so now let's get into your topic on servant leadership, a four-step approach to bringing out the best in yourself and others.
Well, I tell you, servant leadership is the only way to get great results and great human satisfaction. And we really feel that it's important to understand what it's all about. And what we're going to do is take you on a journey through four domains of servant leadership. We're going to look at the heart, which is about your character and who you are. Secondly, we're going to look at your head, which is what are your thoughts and beliefs about servant leadership. Then we're going to look at your hands, which is in many ways, how do you apply and use what you know about servant leadership? And then finally, we'll take a look at your habits, which is what do you do on a daily basis to recalibrate who you want to be in the world. And we feel that the world is in desperate need of a different leadership role model. We've seen what self-serving leaders have done in a negative way in every sector of society. So this is all about how you can make a difference being a servant leader. So Margie, why don't you share a little bit about the first domain, the heart of a servant leader?
The big question we ask is, are you here to serve or to be served? And so when we ask that question, not very many people sign up for, well, I want to be served. They pretty much say, well, of course I'd like to serve. But what gets in the way? We every morning we wake up, we try to do our best in terms of helping our people grow and develop and be interested in them. But what gets in the way? And so one of the big things that we think gets in the way is the human ego. And we all have an ego. I mean, we could call it edging God out or everything good outside, but it's that part of ourselves that gets in the way. And what happens is when the ego's in the way, we either have a more than philosophy, I'm smarter than, or I like to work faster than, or whatever than. Or, and it's a little more surprising, we might have a less than kind of feeling. I'm not as smart as, or I can't speak up or something like that. But it's really that whole idea of focusing on yourself and getting your own feelings in the way rather than focusing on other people. So Ken and I have been very pleased to be part of a master's degree program at the University of San Diego for many years. And so the course that we teach is on servant leadership. And one of the things that we do when we first have met our students is we talk about ego. We talk about when your ego gets in the way, it always separates, it always distorts, and it always compares. And it's always with you. So we sort of have a little fun with it, and we have Egos Anonymous meetings. And what that looks like is if it's my turn, I might stand up and say, hi, I'm Margie, and I'm an egomaniac. And the last time that my ego got in the way was yesterday. Yesterday I noticed an article that was in our, company newsletter, and it was by my daughter. And it was a really great article, but then I'm sitting there thinking, well, why didn't they ask me to write an article? And so my little less than part of the ego gets in the way, and it gets in the way maybe of being as good as I can be. And there's certainly many other ways. But as you go around in the room and everybody shares, maybe an encounter they had with their son or their daughter or their wife, or yesterday at a meeting, you begin to realize that your ego's with you all the time. And so one of the things that you need to be is more aware of it. And, so ask, what's the antidote? Well, one of the antidotes to a more than approach is humility. I mean, that's one of the biggest characteristics of a great leader, is to realize that, you don't know everything, and that things are going to get in your way about your ego. The other is, if you have a less than approach, what I need to remember is God didn't make junk. I'm a wonderful person with good intentions, and if I really want to write that article, then all I need to do is raise my hand and see if I can do that. But I don't want to let that ego get in my way. And so this is a kind of a fun way that we use to help people realize that the more aware you are of your ego getting in the way, the better you're probably going to be in terms of your relationships with other people. But it's a hard issue. It's, do you want to serve or be served? And we really, with servant leadership, we're really focusing on this idea of helping your people win. And that, you are a very important person in that area. So that's one part anyway of the heart and how we might deal with it. So Ken, why don't you talk about the head of a servant leader?
Yes, the head has all to do with what are your beliefs about servant leadership. And when I talk to people about servant leadership, initially, a lot of people thought I was talking about the inmates running the prison or trying to please everybody. But they don't realize that there are two parts of servant leadership. There's vision, direction, values, and goals, because leadership's about going somewheres. And that's the responsibility of the hierarchy. It doesn't mean you don't involve your people, but if your people don't understand what they're being asked to do and what good behavior looks like and what the values that should drive their behavior, shame on you, because it's your responsibility as a manager to make sure that's clear. Now, once the leadership part, and that's what that is, that's the leadership part of servant leadership. And now what you do is philosophically, you turn the pyramid upside down, and now you're working for your people. This is the servant part of servant leadership. And the big question is, how can I help? It's about helping them win. You can always tell an organization run by self-serving leaders, because if you have a problem, what people want to do is they want to go up the hierarchy, and you're talking to ducks. They're going quack, quack, quack. It's our policy, quack, quack. I just work here. I didn't make the policies, quack, 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 quack. And they want to go up the hierarchy, and the leaders want to make sure everybody knows who's in charge. Where if you're in an organization where there are servant leaders, when you got a problem, you're talking to an eagle, and they're ready to say, how can I help? I'll take care of it and all. So that's the important distinction there in the head. And in our course, it's a management of science and executive leadership at the University of San Diego, which we co-started with the university. And Margie's in my course, we teach them how to determine or share their leadership point of view, which is about your beliefs. And Marge, why don't you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, this is some of the most exciting work that I've been doing in the last 5-10 years, really, is helping people, first of all, believe that if people know more about them, and if they know kind of their background and what were some significant experiences in their background and what their learnings were from that, and then how that turned into what they value and what their expectations are and what you can expect from them. It sort of is this inside out job. because leadership is an inside out job. The more you know about yourself, the more you realize what your triggers are, and the more you're willing to share, I think the more effective you are. And one of the wonderful things about doing this in a class is people find that they're interested in other people, not even in our own company, and they become convinced, well, then maybe people will be interested in me. And so the way we get at people's leadership point of view is we have them interview each other 3 or 4 times about significant events and what they learned, or significant people in their lives and what they learned from them, and then how that turned into some of their beliefs and even their values. And then how did that turn into what were some of their expectations? Because even though you might wind up with a 10 or 15-minute talk about your leadership point of view, and even though it's about you, it's for the people who are supporting and depending on you. It's so they will know more about you. So I was thinking about my own leadership point of view and what I might be able to share. And so if I were giving it, I might talk about my grandmother, who lived through the Depression. Unlike my other grandmother, who lived on a farm and had plenty of food and everything, my mother's mother, watched their furniture be sold at auction outside of their house. And she took the 5 children up to a family farm in upper New York State. And my grandfather went to New York to see how he could make a living for the family going forward. And when she was up there, the stories were just amazing about how she knitted outfits for wealthy women in Buffalo, and she grew mushrooms for sale in the basement. And she even watched when they came to turn off the electricity, she watched how they did it. And so after they left, she climbed back up on the pole and turned it back on again. And these were just stories about my grandmother. But when I knew her, and especially as a teenager, she came to Philadelphia where we were living. She was a renowned flower arranging contestant and also judge. And, but I watched her, and, if she couldn't find the right dishes for her flower arrangement, she learned to make them. She became a ceramics expert. And I would, as a nice teenager, if I were going out on an errand, I'd ask grandmother, would you like to go? Well, she always wanted to go. And she was full of questions. She wanted to know why my collar was up like this, and what's that little circle pin, and all these things. Very curious, very curious. In fact, I think she's the only person in the family that read Ken's doctoral dissertation and then used it to evaluate grandfather's leadership style. But I learned so much from her. I learned about resilience. I learned about resourcefulness. I watched the curiosity that she had, and those are important things for me. They're important for our team. They're important for us, especially right now when we have to be resourceful. And so you can depend on me wanting that for us and for our team and valuing that. And, I might even say, Francisco, when you went through all those learning aids that we've had and you looked which ones are still working and which ones aren't, that's an example of resourcefulness that I really, really appreciate. Anyway, that might be woven into a 10 to 15 minute talk, but at the end, people know me better. They're going to remember the stories that I told, and they're probably going to remember the values that came out of those stories and what some of those expectations are. And so it's a gift to them. And one of the things that has really been working in our company is when someone takes a new position. For instance, our son just became president of the Ken Blanchard companies in January. And the very first thing that he did was work on his leadership point of view, because some people knew him in various ways over the years and some didn't know him at all. And he put the time in to talk about his background, what it was like growing up in our family, what were some of the key events that shaped him, and what were the values that he prized. In his case, it was really being forthright, which has really been important, being kind. And, even people that had known him for a long time knew him in another way. And it really was a wonderful way for him to start his influence process, but also so people knew what to expect from him, what he expected of us, and also why. And so it's become an important thing. It's not easy work. And what I love is by the end of our weekend together, people have a crafted leadership point of view. Our coaches work very hard with people one-on-one to develop their leadership point of view. And some of them use it in orientation, some of them use it trying to get new jobs. But it's a way of kind of pulling together your beliefs and where those beliefs came from, and really help you with the head part of servant leadership. So Ken, talk about the hands.
Well, it's important, as Margie's saying, to understand, first of all, who you are. In your heart, you want to serve. What are your beliefs that you have about leadership? How are you going to serve? And your leadership point of view really is a way for you to find out about yourself and then to share that with your people so they understand you. Now, what they're going to be interested in, though, which gets to the hands, is do you walk your talk? Because the hands is all about your behavior. And to me, when you're talking about servant leadership and really implementing it, the whole big point is, how do you help the people around you win? How do you help them improve their performance? And to me, there's three parts of managing people's performance. There's performance planning, where you set goals and objectives, and also the people are clear on what they're being asked to do and how you might go about helping them. Then there is, once that's taken care of, then you move to the next thing, which is day-to-day coaching. So that now, once they are clear about goals, how do you help them accomplish it? And then the final is performance evaluation. But the problem is, when I talk to people around the world and about these three things, performance planning, day-to-day coaching, and performance evaluation, I ask them, which one do you spend the most time on? And universally, I get evaluation. Why? Because that's where the emphasis is. Because in so many organizations, they have to determine who they're going to build up and who they're going to kind of take down, because they're supposed to have a normal distribution curve. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I mean, I say to people, how many are going to go out and hire some losers this year? I mean, we lost some of our worst people last year. How do we get some new losers to fill the low slots? No, you either hire winners who you steal from other companies, or you hire people who are potential winners and you help them. And so, to me, the biggest area that you need to spend on is the day-to-day coaching. And when I talked about the head, which is performance planning, the emphasis is on the leadership part. What are we going to try to accomplish? Once people are clear on their goals and objectives, now you move to the servant part, and that's where it's all about day-to-day coaching. How do I help them win? And I always felt, when I was a college professor, I was in trouble because the faculty would say, what are you doing? Because I would give people the final exam the first day of class. And they said, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to help them win. Well, don't give them the questions in the final. And I say, not only am I going to give them the questions in the final, what do you think I'm going to do all semester? I'm going to teach them the answers. So when they get to the final exam, they get A. Life is about getting A's, not some stupid normal distribution curve. And when organizations do that, what a difference. Gary Ridge, who's the president of WD-40, was in our first cohort in our master's degree program. And he started applying all this that we taught him. And he and I wrote a book together called Help People Win at Work, and listen to the subtitle, a business philosophy called Don't Mark My Paper, Help Me Get an A. And so at WD-40, the whole goal is, how do you help people win? How do you help them get an A? And the thing is not to sort people out, it's to help them get an A. And at WD-40, managers don't fill out forms on their people fill out forms. And they get together once in a quarter and look at, what have they given an A, B, and a C to? There's no D's or F's. And then the manager looks and says agrees or disagrees. And they do that every quarter. They can even change their goals all the way to the beginning of the fourth quarter. You think this makes a difference? You better believe it, because WD-40 in the last count had a 93% employee engagement score. Can you imagine that? And in a recent survey, they asked people, and they're in 30 nations and all, are you proud to tell people you work for WD-40? 99% of the people said yes. So, wow, if you walk your talk, it really makes a difference. So the heart is, what do you believe, what's in your heart about leadership. Then the head is what your thoughts are. And then the hands is what do you do. Now, Margie, share with them about the habits, which is all about recalibration and being who you say you wanted to be.
Okay, the habits are important, but I want to just touch on the hands. Our programs, situational or SL2, and 1 Minute Manager and Building Trust and Managing Change and so many of the other programs that are offered through our industry, they really are the hands. They're helping people to behave on their good intentions and to have more enlightened conversations with their people. And again, I love this side-by-side sort of thing. But when you get to the habits, we all, again, wake up in the morning and we want to be the best managers or best leaders we can. So how do we stay on this path? How do we recalibrate ourselves so that we can be strong? And particularly right now with so much that's going on. So there are a couple things that I'd like to suggest. I think there are some rituals. One of the rituals that is most important to me is having regular one-on-one meetings with your people. And the one-on-one meetings I'm talking about are not performance improvement meetings. They really are what's on your mind. To this day, when I have a meeting with my direct report, what's on your mind? Because I want to hear what's getting in the way of their life or what's good, what's really good. And so it's building that relationship. But in many ways, structure helps. And having one-on-one meetings that people can count on is a way, a habit that you can inculcate in your culture. Also, taking care of yourself. I mean, to this day, we are surrounded by such negative news. And one of the things that I personally do is I try to feed my mind with positive things. I try to feed my mind with hopeful things because I think that leaders are purveyors of hope. And I think that we need to believe that, that we have wonderful people in our organizations and that they are wanting to help. And I don't know, I heard a story of a little girl who got accidentally 80% on her spelling test. And she thought, 80%? Boy, if I study, I could get 100%. So she did. She studied and she got 100% on her next spelling test. And I asked myself, what are the chances of that little girl's teacher or her principal hearing about that little victory versus the kid who sets off a firecracker in his locker? Bad news rises. And what happens is bad news comes right to the manager's desk. It comes right to the leader's desk. And if you're not careful and you don't feed yourself hopeful things, you could begin to think people are changing and that you need more and more rules to keep people, on the right track. And I think it's very, very important to feed yourself with positive and inspirational messages, stories. Certainly meditation helps, prayer. One of the big things that we work with our leaders on is solitude, having a chance to pull back a little. And we've certainly, I think, had some more opportunities to do that lately. But I think that all of that helps you sort of recalibrate. Am I living according to the very things that I value the most? And if I'm not, then how can I do better tomorrow? And so I think that having a chance to pull back a little bit, certainly people that journal really can look at the things that they're struggling with, and prayer is also very, very helpful. So I think whatever you can do to, I call it extreme self-care, extreme self-care in the midst of a world that is asking us to go faster and faster and in less and less depth. And I really believe that if you want to be a servant leader, you do have to take care of yourself and protect yourself from from, basically a lot of messages that may not serve you, in terms of truly believing that you have a wonderful opportunity in leading people to impact their lives. And so that's certainly one of the things that I would put under the habits part. Okay, so Ken, what do you have to add to this in terms of habits that are helping you?
Well, I tell you, Margie, I learned from Norman Vincent Peale. He was 86 years old, the author of The Power of Positive Thinking. And he said, we have two selves. We have an external task-oriented self that's used to getting jobs done. And then we have a thoughtful, reflective self. Now, which one of those wakes up quicker in the morning? It's the external task-oriented self. What happens? The alarm goes off. John Ortberg, who's a wonderful pastor in Northern California and a friend, says, why don't we call it the opportunity clock, or it's going to be a great day? No, alarm. So now you jump into your task-oriented self, and you're eating while you're trying to wash, you jump in your car, you're on your cell phone and all. And you get to the office, you run from this meeting, that meeting, you get home at night, you're absolutely exhausted, fall into bed, don't have the energy to even say goodnight to somebody who might be lying next to you. Boom, the next day you're out. And pretty soon you're caught in a rat race. And I love Lily Talman, the great Hollywood philosopher. She said, the problem with a rat race is even if you win it, you're still a rat. So one of the things that I try to do is enter my day slowly before I get into my task-oriented self. And so I think about the day and what's on my schedule. How do I want to be today? How can I best serve those people? And so I really kind of anticipate the day and what it's going to be. And then I go on into the day, but I've really had some chance to think about it, even kind of maybe review my mission statement and my picture of the future and some of my values and things like that. So who do I want to be today? And then it's really interesting. A friend of mine said, Blanchard, you get messed up my life for a lot of times, but now even at the end of the day, because he said he didn't normally, write a journal because, he's competitive and some people write in 3 or 4 colors and poetry. And he realizes now, and boy, it's a great idea. I do it now. At the end of the day, he has a journal. He writes the date on it. And then he puts praisings, which is from the original 1 Minute Manager. What did you do today that's consistent with who you want to be? So pat yourself on the back. And then after that, he puts redirections, which is what did I do today that I wish I hadn't done or wasn't consistent with who I wanted to be. I might set up an apology the next day and all. And I tell you, tracking your praisings and redirections at the end of the day really helps you. And what have they said for a long time? Unexamined life isn't worth living. And so the habits section really helps you there. So as we look at how we go about helping people become the servant leaders that they need today, we have them first look at their heart, their intentions, their character. Do they want to serve or be served? Then into their head, which is what are their beliefs about servant leadership and how does that lead into their leadership point of view? And then from there, what does this mean in terms of their behavior? How do they focus on really helping other people win and getting out of their own particular way? And then finally, what are the habits that help you recalibrate who you want to be in the world? And so that's really what we're all about. Marge, do you have any final thoughts you want to share?
Well, I think that, we're really talking about enlightened leadership principles here. This whole idea that your job is to help people get an A, not sort them out, that's not the way it's always been. And so what I'm hoping is that you might take 1 or 2 ideas away from this that might help you to move towards this goal that you might have to become more of a servant leader.
Oh, thank you so much, Margie and Ken. That's fantastic. The heart, the head, the hands, the habits, these are all wonderful, very helpful recommendations. Margie, you were just talking about how it's not we're hopefully moving into a more enlightened age of leadership, but that's not how it's always been. And I believe, having read some of Ken's work, he says that leaders are conditioned to think of leadership only in terms of power and control. What are the forces that kind of keep that old style of leadership in place? Why is it so hard to break down that model and move to a more enlightened leadership model?
Well, probably we don't have a lot of models. You know, if we've been in the workforce for a while, I think many leaders who haven't been through any kind of training, and more than 50% of people that get into positions of leadership have had no training. And so all they have are the models of things that from movies or from things that have happened to them, and they don't have a chance really. And one of the things we know is if people start out without good habits, 10 years later, they have those same bad habits. And so one of the things that we're hoping for is to get to new managers faster. You know, if you become a manager over peers that you enjoyed, you have a different life. You have a different lifestyle. People don't invite you to dinner. They don't invite you to lunch anymore. You now are responsible on some level for the work getting done in a different way. And there are ways that you can learn to do that in a side-by-side way, rather than going back to maybe some of the models you have that maybe don't put the relationship in such an important part of it. We really believe that it's an awesome responsibility, and it's really an awesome privilege to be a leader. Wouldn't you love, if you have a son or daughter, wouldn't you love to think that they would have a leader or a manager that would be really interested in them, not only in doing today's work and develop for that, but also what is their career? You know, where would they like to be in 5 years, and have discussions about that, which is why I love these one-on-one meetings, because you can discuss things like that then. So it's an awesome privilege, and it's not easy. And so that's why we're as excited. I'm as excited right now as I've ever been about our field, because I think that young people have higher expectations than ever before. And I think they're forcing us in many ways to use many more enlightened leadership principles.
That's so inspiring. Thank you, Margie. I wanted to turn a bit to some of the things that Ken was saying about the heart. I was really struck about how you were saying that the ego gets in the way, and that's sort of what blocks things. But what are some things that can feed the heart? What are some of the positive things that leaders should move forward toward in order to make sure their heart is as full and other-centered as it can be?
Before I answer that question, I'd like to respond to Margie quickly, if I could.
Please do. Yes, please do.
Now, Margie said that people don't have a lot of examples, but in many ways we do, because people ask me, well, who does and uses the concepts you share? Only the best winning companies in the country. Southwest Airlines in the airline industry. I wrote a book with Colleen Barrett, who was president after Herb Kelleher stepped down. Wegmans in the grocery business. Disney in entertainment. Synovus in financial services. They won the best company to work for so often from Fortune magazine. They stopped him from applying. And Jimmy Blanchard, he's not a relative, but I would have taken him. Completely a servant leader. Starbucks, another example of that. So you get great leaders, and when they do it, it makes a difference, and their companies become fabulous.
Wonderful, thank you. So I wanted to turn again to the question of ego, and not so much ego, but heart. The question is about the heart, and I was struck by how you were saying earlier that the ego is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of our heart. What are some things that can feed the heart and that can help our hearts be as outward centered as possible?
I'd like to just mention one thing. There's a concept called generous listening. I think we suffer from an inability to listen well. Mm-hmm. And when I have an opportunity to work with a team, one of the things that I try to get them to do is to do almost like a talking stick. You know, maybe they're discussing a problem. And so each person has a chance to talk. And then when they finish, they pass the talking stick to the person next to them. and then they have a chance to weigh in, and then the next person and the next person. In the meantime, people aren't supposed to interfere. And after a while, you notice some of the people are putting a pencil in their mouth because they're so used to chiming in and making some kind of a comment. But if you get around a whole circle of people that actually are listening and not just thinking about what the next thing they're going to say is, there's an intimacy and an interest in people that develops, and people realize that it's because they're not listening to people that it's taking so much longer. And I believe that people's heart gets activated because they get to actually hear what other people are saying and thinking. And this is especially true if you've got some introverts, some people that don't get heard very often. They're often very reflective. They have a lot to say, but they're not willing to fight for airtime. And so just that little idea of structure, sometimes structure helps you do the things that you want to do, but left to our own devices, things get in the way.
Ken, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think, as Margie mentioned back in the beginning, talking about the heart, is we all have an ego. And what we need to do is be willing to help each other get our egos out of the way. But the important thing is that before you can really help somebody else with their ego, you have to have a relationship with them. I'll never forget when I was teaching at a business school a number of years ago, the dean had written a lot about participative management, but he didn't apply it. And faculty members would go in and tell him, your ego's in the way and you're doing this, and he'd throw them out of the office, And so I agree with what they were doing, but I knew I needed to develop a relationship. So I stopped him in the hall, and I was just beginning my writing. And I said, George, you've written a lot. Would you be willing to look at a paper I've just written? I hope to get it published. Oh, sure, come on in. I went to his office. He had flip charts, and he was giving me all kinds of advice. And so I ended up having about 2 or 3 sessions with him on writing. And finally, towards the end of the 3rd session, he said, Ken, what do you think we should do with all the jerks we have in this school? And the big comment to me is, what should we do? Mm-hmm. And then I was really able then to tell him some things that we could do, but also some things that he could do, and maybe how I could help him and others people when his ego got in the way. So we all have an ego, and we need people to help us get out of the way.
Thanks, Ken. Margie, that's a great answer. I wanted to talk a little bit about the head. This is about the vision part of it. Margie, I was really struck by your guidance regarding the point of view statement and thinking that there's risk in leaders doing this and crafting it, and that they could worry a lot that their story wouldn't resonate with them. They could think, well, I should be making myself the center of attention. I think a big part of what's required here is vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Could one or both of you speak to the role that vulnerability plays in being a good servant leader?
Right. Well, Colleen Barrett from Southwest Airlines always said, people admire you for your accomplishments, but they love you for your vulnerabilities, which means you're willing to share maybe sometimes it didn't go as well for you and what you learned. And initially, when we work with people on their leadership point of view, they're not as anxious to do that until they have a chance to listen to somebody else's leadership point of view and realize that it's those lessons that come from hard times and the stories that come from hard times that actually help people bond with you more. And so in some ways, we have to help them get over the belief that people aren't going to be interested, especially when they find they're interested. And so I think part of the coaching that goes on with our coaches is to help people, sort of figure out what are some stories that they do want to tell. What did they learn? How did that turn into things that are important to them? Mm-hmm. And we do it in a classroom setting, but it's often done in a coaching session. And can I say that people are comfortable initially? Well, of course not. Mm-hmm. I would be the last person to say. We have one client that expects leaders to develop and share their leadership point of view. And we had another client that once it got started at the top, then the next layer down did their leadership points of view, and they realized that it was a way for them to relate more human to human. But it was, again, it was a willingness to take a risk and to be more real with people. And so I've just watched it. I've watched it many years now. I have every year our students write up their leadership points of view. We see them all over. We have a party every year for them. And many of them say that of all the practical things that they did in that course, that's the one that they still use. And so it's inside out work. You can do it. And it's certainly helpful to be coached, but I think you have to believe it's important, for one thing, and believe that it would be meaningful.
Oh, that's great advice. Ken, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I think it's important that what Margie's saying is that people share their vulnerability. And it's interesting, she mentioned our son took over as president of our company in January and then got in the middle of the whole pandemic and all, but sharing that his leadership point of view, that his values was forthrightness. People have been so amazed about his willing to admit what he knows and what he doesn't know, and his vulnerability and all. And it just has drawn everybody into a we attitude rather than, what are they going to do? It's what are we going to do? So it's pretty powerful stuff.
Very powerful. Thank you both for that. In terms of talking about hands, this is the execution part, as you were saying. How do you walk your talk and how do you help them win? This reminded me of something that my father, who was in publishing for many years, said that the leader's job is all about eliminating obstacles for the people in the organization so they can achieve their goals. I'm wondering, does that resonate with you? Does that sound like servant leadership behavior? And if it is, how do you get it right between eliminating the right obstacles and letting people work through their own solutions?
I think that's right on, because when we get to the servant part of servant leadership, remember the pyramid is turned upside down, and now you're working for your people, and you aren't supposed to eliminate obstacles that you think that they have. Ask them what are their obstacles and how can I help? That's the biggest question. How can I help? What issues do you have? How can I help? One of the ways a friend always started his meetings with his team was having everybody go around initially and say, what went well between now and when we met last and now, and they share stuff that they can all praise each other. And then he said, okay, what are you doing this week that you have some concerns about that maybe we might be able to help? And sharing concerns and reaching out and helping that. But remember, it's the obstacles that they're concerned about, not the ones that you think they should be concerned about.
I worked with a client who they had just implemented this stacked ranking thing where you had to put people in different categories. And I was mostly working with the middle managers and some HR people. There was so much pain in that room. They had 2 reductions in force already. They had people that had been with them 8 or 9 years who were doing a great job. And here they were having to rank people, excellent, average, or whatever. It was so painful. And the next meeting I actually had the senior leaders come in and listen to the pain because they were not dealing with a normal distribution at all. And, but they, people get these ideas and they think it sounds good. And then, your people are your most important people and you want to treat them well. And this was very painful. And so, I think sometimes just having somebody speak up or be able to say the truth is really helpful with that.
Mm-hmm. So helpful. Thank you, Margie. In terms of habits, I loved how practical these all were in terms of having rituals and taking care of yourself. And Margie, I was struck by your point about, feed yourself good news. And that made me just reflect on news generally, which is pretty bad right now. And there's a lot of it coming from a lot of different directions. What advice do you have for aspiring servant leaders on getting the message right between transparency and negativity? How can leaders message in such a way where they give people what they need to know and still leave them with hope?
Well, I think you have to be assertive about looking for good news in your company, in your organization. I think you have to ask for it, so that people feel good about sending good news up the hierarchy or across the hierarchy, and celebrate that. Because, as I say, if you believe you have good people that are doing their best, and and even with some of our clients, if something goes wrong, instead of punishing them, we call it a learning moment, and that kind of thing. And I mean, we're not going to be perfect. We're in uncharted territory right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think that a lot of it has to do, how do you react to things when they're not perfect? Mm-hmm. And if you go around looking for who to blame, and there's that kind of a thing, then the people below you or above you are going to do the same thing. So there's a lot of modeling that I think has to go on in terms of realizing that we're all in new territory here. We're having to do things we haven't done before, and we've got a whole new generation of people that have different expectations. And so I think if you're kinder to yourself and kinder to other people, you're going to get a kinder environment. And a lot of it's self-control. A lot of it is but I would look for the good news too, because people love to hear that. But what really winds up on your desk is bad news usually.
Mm-hmm. In relation to that is that people have asked me, Ken, if we took everything away you've ever taught over the years, what would you hold on to? What one concept? I think it's the second secret of the 1 Minute Manager, which is about 1 minute praising, which is wandering around and see if you can catch people doing things right. And I think the way you overcome just getting bad news is to get out of your office, and wander around and just find out what's going on, and cheer people on, and all that kind of thing, rather than sitting around waiting for bad news to be sent up the hierarchy to you. Go and look for good news.
Good, thank you. This idea of wandering around and catching people doing things, we're in currently in a different scenario where we're not physically with most of the people we're working with right now. And so I'm wondering, I'm sure none of the core values change in terms of servant leadership, but are there new habits we should be thinking about developing when people are not in the same room together most of the time? And often that probably will be a major shift going forward.
People say, what have I learned in this pandemic? I've learned a lot about technology and all, but having Zoom meetings are just fabulous, I mean, so don't say we can't be face-to-face. Well, maybe not physically, but you can be face-to-face on Zoom. I mean, even with our company, on just the other day, our son Scott had a Zoom meeting with the entire company, and over 250 people got on the Zoom call as he kind of shared where we were and what we some of the actions we had to take in order to survive as a company, but also protect as many people's jobs as we possibly can. And so use the technology in a positive way, I think, and don't just kind of bury yourself.
Yeah, you can also, there's a lot of power in questions. If you have a Zoom meeting, before you get into the problem that you're on there to talk about, just ask people, just talk about one thing that made you feel good about this week, and just start with sort of an uplifting question rather than digging into something that you're going to spend some time figuring out. I mean, that's why we have leaders. Leaders deal with problems. Okay, there are going to be problems all the time. But we all should be able to think of something that makes us feel good. And one thing about Zoom that I love is you can go person to person to person to person, and they're not necessarily talking over each other. So I think just ask people to notice, notice more about what's going on that makes them feel good is a good habit. It's a good ritual. It's a good habit.
Excellent points. Yeah, it reminds me of at Kohler, the management team has moved to a practice away from just a general check-in to a guided check-in and the questions are always about something that is about imagining a positive future. So is it what's something that you're looking forward to? What's something you're proud of? And it sets a tone for the meeting and helps people, not just, as you were saying, go right to the problem, but also have a kind of aspirational mindset. And I think that's been helpful for us. So I imagine that not everyone is on board with servant leadership. I've heard tell that people think it's too soft and isn't sufficiently focused on the bottom line. You've had many years to overcome these objections within your own organizations and with all the clients you work with. Could you, for people who want to implement servant leadership in action, but maybe encountering some resistance, what are some tips and tools you might have for guiding them down that path?
Well, I think first you have to return to the belief that servant leadership is the only way, as John Maxwell said in the foreword to our book, Servant Leadership in Action, to get great results and great human satisfaction. And the way that occurs is that people are clear on what they're being asked to do and the goals are clear and all. And then all the energy is on helping people win. And I think when that happens, what a difference in the organization it makes. And as I said, there are models. Only the best companies in the country are doing this. So maybe you might want to get aboard and stop resisting.
I think that the key place to start servant leadership is in the manager-direct report relationship. And if you can improve that, if you can feed managers questions that they might ask, one of the things managers are often reluctant to do is ask any kind of career questions. Like, what gets you excited about your job now? Who has a job in the company you think you might like? I think people who feel that their managers are interested in them more than just are they going to get this project done, that builds the relationship. And I think the big thing that keeps leaders from doing that is they don't have a promotion in their back pocket. So to be able to have a conversation with somebody and just let it be, and maybe opportunities will come up. I love Beverly Kay's work on, the questions that you can ask people. But I think that between the one-on-one meetings and being courageous about the conversations, but also just believing that relationship is an awesome relationship, and that is going to be the one that's going to change your culture, probably more than anything. The work that we do with our programs, it's based on improving those conversations between people. And I think if it starts there, then it's gonna move. And when we see our clients adopt these one-on-one meetings, for instance, we had this one client that said, "Oh, I love Blanchard. They have wonderful content." And then they have the system. And I said, "Well, really, what's the system?" One-on-one meetings. And so 80-20, if you're going to go for something, it would be to encourage, I think, that relationship at the very core of what you would love for your daughter or son, and you would love for yourself. And the more stress we're under, the more you should be moving closer to your people. When everything's going well, you can afford more delegation. But when things are not going well, and there's so much change, you have to move closer. You have to move from delegating to supporting, or supporting to coaching, or whatever, because people are anxious. And that's when the relationships are really going to I think, help you with the culture in your company.
With the one-on-one meetings, it's important that we say to people that you want to have one at a minimum once every 2 weeks for 15 to 30 minutes, and you don't want to go more than 30 minutes, but the manager schedules a meeting, but the direct report sets the agenda. And if you met with your people 26 times a year, would you know them and would they know you? Yeah, I think the problem is that managers don't have enough interaction with their people. And as Peter Drucker said, nothing good happens by accidents. So put some structure on it. And that's why we love one-on-ones. It's a very good structure.
Oh, that's great. For me, a big through line of this whole conversation has been humble listening. And that's there are so many ways in which listening can move the organization forward and move the relationships forward, but it has to be from a place of humility. The leader doesn't know everything, and it's very important to be proactive about setting up structures for that. So thank you for that advice.
Left to our own devices, we don't always do it right.
True.
So having a turn. And I ask people at the end, if we go around, what was different about that? And they say, well, I realize that most of the time I don't even hear what people say. I'm formulating my own response. And that's why meetings last so much longer than they should, because we actually aren't hearing each other. People are thinking, did I get my airtime? And so we have some bad habits that we can change.
But you've inspired me with many, many practical and philosophical points here that make me optimistic that this is doable and possible, and it's really part of our future. So I just want to thank both of you, Ken and Margie. I'm so appreciative that you shared your experiences with us today. Next, we're going to tell the audience about your bonus gift and leave them with a practice they can implement immediately. But before we do that, I'd like to remind everyone that you can own this entire summit through our leadership training kit. This gets you downloadable access to the videos, audios, transcripts, and bonus gifts of the speakers, all for only $297. After the summit, the price will go up to $497. So if you'd like to own the materials forever and refer back to them at your convenience, now is the time. Now, Margie, would you kindly share with our audience some information about your generous bonus gift?
Well, it's terrific. It's, one of the hallmarks of our company is trying to bring things down to the most simple things. And so this is a 24-page, 6-chapter resource white paper. And it covers what some of the leading companies are doing to create a servant leadership culture. It's a lot about performance partnerships that Ken talked about. How do you set people up for success so they get an A? There's a chapter on motivation and what actually is motivating to people, and sometimes it's not what we think. I love the chapter on the neuroscientific argument for servant leadership, and that was by our daughter-in-law, Madeline, who's been studying the brain and how it responds to stress and how the brain gets tired and what you can do about that. Also, there's a chapter on leading in a virtual environment, which couldn't be more timely. And then finally, just really a whole thing saying that servant leadership is the key to success, and hopefully will be motivating for people to try some of these ideas.
Wow, fabulous gift. Thank you so much.
All in 24 pages.
Wow, fabulous gift. Thank you so much for your generosity with that. So now, just in closing, Margie, I'm wondering if you could share one key takeaway or practice that you'd like to emphasize regarding leadership for a changing world.
I think we've covered the one-on-one meetings pretty well. And if I were to say that would probably do the most in there, but I think it goes back to your belief system. I think the one thing I would love to have people come away with is that they have wonderful people working for them. And they also, as a leader, they know how, in their own way, to be a servant leader. I often think about our kids. We give generously to our children, without expecting anything in return. I haven't heard very many parents say to their kids, this just isn't working out. So we know how to do a lot of the things that we're talking about here. We just need to make sure we are doing them, that we stay calibrated, that we don't get so off track that we're not the best that we can be. And I think that this business of self-care, this business of some of the structures we're considering, but it's doable. It's really doable. and it's going to make a better world. And so I just hope that one or two ideas, one-on-one meetings, generous listening, and taking good care of yourself so you're not tired and frazzled. I mean, just this thing about how fast your brain wears out. You are tired by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You maybe shouldn't be having meetings about important things there. So there are a myriad of ideas, and maybe people could, just themselves select which is the one to start with and try.
Thank you, Margie. Very inspirational. On behalf of the Leadership for a Changing World team, I'd like to thank you, Ken, and Margie for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.
It's been a joy. You
You've
can see I
enjoyed it.
married way above myself. I hope you all saw that.
It's a privilege to be part of this series. It's doing exactly what we need.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in as we discuss leadership models and practices for rapidly changing times.